"Excuse me, this is my seat." The words rang out low and clear, cutting through the hum of the business-class cabin like a bell at midnight. Every head turned. Standing in the aisle was David Cole, a black man in his late 30s. He wore a plain navy jacket, travel-worn jeans, and carried himself with quiet composure. Nothing about his appearance suggested wealth or power. He looked like someone out of place here, someone the cabin's regular travelers were not accustomed to seeing. His eyes, steady but polite, were fixed on the woman in the seat, he claimed. She looked up slowly. Catherine Whitmore, late 50s, white, wealthy socialite, designer dress, dark sunglasses still on, though the cabin lights were dim, heels polished to a gleam. She was the kind of passenger who radiated entitlement the way others radiated cologne. Her lips curved in disdain. "Fuck off," she snapped. "This seat isn't for low-class people like you." The insult fell heavy, shocking even in a cabin where whispers of privilege often went unspoken. The atmosphere shifted instantly. The easy chatter of boarding dissolved into brittle silence. A man coughed. A woman adjusted her scarf, eyes averted but ears sharpened. Leather seats creaked as passengers leaned subtly toward the spectacle, unwilling to miss what was unfolding. David did not flinch. His tone remained measured, even gentle. "I believe there's been a mistake," he said, holding his boarding pass in one hand. "This seat is assigned to me." Catherine's chin lifted as though she were being offered something distasteful. She did not glance at the pass. "People like you don't sit here," she said, her voice pitched high enough for the nearby rows to hear. "This is business class. Surely you understand the difference." Her words dripped with venom, but also with performance, the kind designed to recruit an audience, and she had one. Murmurs rustled through the cabin. A man in a tailored suit leaned toward his seatmate. "Probably a fake ticket," he muttered. "They try it all the time." His companion smirked. "The nerve! These people always chasing things that aren't theirs." The whispers spread, harsh in tone though soft in volume, carrying judgment from row to row. The irony was glaring. Those who fancied themselves refined were the ones sneering like children, while the man they mocked held his ground with dignity. David stood steady, his voice unwavering. "I have no wish for conflict. I only ask that you look at my boarding pass. The seat number is right here." But Catherine was not listening. Her face twisted into a mask of outrage. "How dare you presume," she hissed, tugging her designer bag closer as though his presence contaminated the air. The cabin's energy tightened. Flight attendants exchanged glances. One of them, a younger woman, started forward, only to hesitate when Catherine raised her voice again. "Wait a second. If you like this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. It really helps us." "Do you hear me?" Catherine called out, projecting her words for the cabin. "He thinks this seat belongs to him. Him, in business class." A ripple of nervous laughter broke from the back rows, quickly smothered. Others shifted uncomfortably. A few passengers avoided looking at David at all, as if his existence was the problem, not the insult hurled at him. The air itself seemed heavier. Engines rumbled faintly beneath the cabin floor. But the dominant sound was silence. Thick, judging, suffocating. David drew a slow breath. He did not raise his voice. "I will wait for the crew to confirm," he said. Catherine leaned back, satisfied as though she had already won. She crossed her legs, the pointed heel of one shoe tapping against the floor like a gavel. "You'll be waiting a long time," she sneered. "That seat belongs to someone who matters." The insult lingered, naked in its cruelty. And so the conflict stood exposed. One man, calm and deliberate, armed only with patience and truth. One woman, cloaked in wealth and venom, certain her prejudice would be validated. Between them stretched the fault line of class, race, and power, revealed not in courtrooms or boardrooms, but here in the enclosed theater of an airplane cabin 30,000 feet from anywhere. No one moved, no one spoke, but the tension crackled through the rows like static. The confrontation had only begun, and every passenger knew it. This flight would not be remembered for where it landed, but for what had just been said at row 4A. David Cole held his boarding pass steady, the slip of paper that was supposed to shield him from doubt. His voice remained calm, as though calmness itself could protect him. "Here is my seat assignment," he said quietly. Row 4, Seat A. It was the kind of tone he had practiced for years. Gentle, deliberate, impossible to mistake for aggression. He knew exactly how quickly the world judged a black man's raised voice, how swiftly composure was reinterpreted as threat. But the cabin around him wasn't listening to his tone. From across the aisle, a scoff broke the hush. Richard Manning, 53, white, investment consultant, cufflinks flashing as he leaned forward, barked a laugh. Fake tickets. You read about it all the time. Print one on the internet. Sneak into business class. See how far you get. Elaine Foster, 62, white, a retired principal whose voice had once ruled classrooms, shook her head. Honestly, it's delusion. People chasing what was never meant for them. It's embarrassing. The cabin, hushed only seconds earlier, began to vibrate with judgment. Words whispered yet deliberate, threaded from row to row. He thought he could really sit here. Must be desperate for attention. They'll drag him out if he keeps this up. David heard it all, every syllable carved at him. Yet he kept his shoulders straight. He refused to let them see the insult land. Catherine Whitmore reclined in the seat that wasn't hers, smug satisfaction softening her features. The sunglasses she'd shoved to her head caught the light, a small crown of entitlement. David extended the pass closer, almost directly into her line of sight. "Madam, please look. The number is clear. This is mine." Her lips curled. "I don't need to look at anything. Seats like this are not for people like you. You'd be wise to remember your place." Gasps fluttered through the cabin. A young man in row 5 shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. An older woman near the window clutched her handbag tighter, as if the true offense wasn't Catherine's venom but David's persistence. Only David himself remained steady. The irony hung naked in the air. The so-called refined passengers, sneering like children, while the man they demeaned was the only one who carried himself with dignity. At last, a uniform appeared. Margaret Lewis, 45, white, the chief flight attendant, moved briskly down the aisle. She was practiced at this role, the mediator in midair, the quiet enforcer of order. Her dark hair was pinned back immaculately, her tone clipped but professional. "Sir," she said, "may I see your boarding pass?" David handed it over without hesitation. His hand was steady. Margaret scanned it once, then again. There was no error. It was valid. Row 4, Seat A, his seat. The correct solution was clear. She should ask Catherine Whitmore to move, to restore fairness. But fairness was heavy, and Catherine's glare was heavier. Margaret glanced at her, at the cut of her designer dress, the expectation written on her face, the expectation that the airline would bend around her as others always had. Margaret forced a thin smile. "Sir," she said quietly, almost apologetically, "to avoid escalation, would you be willing to take another seat for now? Just until things settle down." David looked at her, disbelief flickering across his otherwise controlled features. "Another seat?" Margaret lowered her voice further. "We have an open space toward the back, near the lavatories. It's temporary." David let the words hang between them. He wanted to ask, "Temporary for how long? Until you land? Until injustice feels polite enough?" But he did not. "Instead," he said evenly, "so you are asking me to surrender my place, not because my ticket is wrong, but because she dislikes who I am?" Margaret's eyes darted to Catherine, then back. "Sir, please. It will make everyone more comfortable." "Everyone?" David asked softly. "Or everyone else?" Her silence answered for her. Behind them the passengers stirred, eager for the show to end. "Of course he has to move," Richard Manning muttered, emboldened now. "Better than delaying the whole flight." "Exactly," Elaine Foster agreed. "Always trying to stir trouble and then pretending it's about fairness." The hypocrisy pressed tighter. Catherine leaned back, victorious. "You heard her," she said sweetly. "Time to go." David breathed once, twice. He thought of the fire his father once told him to fear, the fire that consumed dignity if you fed it with rage. He swallowed it. He reached for his ticket, took it back from Margaret, and gave her a single respectful nod. Then he turned and walked down the aisle. The humiliation stretched with every step. Passengers leaned away from him as he passed, as though he carried contagion. Some smirked openly, others whispered without lowering their voices. Back where he belongs. Tried to climb too high. Order restored. The laughter was not loud, but it was worse for being quiet, conspiratorial. Finally, he reached the seat. Row 32C. The cushion was thin, the armrests scuffed, the space cramped. The hiss of the lavatory door sounded only inches away, the air perfumed with disinfectant. The perks of business class, the wine glasses, the linen napkins, the gentle murmurs of attendants, were a world away. Here there was no service, no comfort, only the reminder of exile. David folded his tall frame into the seat, lowering himself with deliberate care, as though even now he refused to move with resentment. The laughter followed him down the aisle, fading but never gone. Even in row 32 he could feel it echoing. He stared at the seat back in front of him, its tiny screen flickering a welcome video. For a moment he allowed the weight to press fully against his ribs. The insult, the whispers, the mockery. Then, quietly, he reached into his pocket. He pulled out his phone. His fingers tapped quickly, efficiently. A message composed in seconds, sent in silence. His face revealed nothing. To the passengers around him, he was just another man scrolling in defeat. But the truth was different. That message was the hinge on which the entire flight would turn. No one noticed. No one cared. They believed the matter settled, the seat reclaimed, the intruder pushed back, the hierarchy preserved. What they didn't know was that every smirk, every whispered insult, every cruel glance would soon return to them with the force of revelation. And when it did, the weight of their prejudice would be exposed before the world. For now the engines roared, lifting the plane higher into the night sky. Passengers unwrapped their blankets, ordered wine, slipped into movies and sleep. To them, the story was over. But for David Cole, seated by the lavatory in row 32C, the story was only just beginning. The plane steadied, engines humming at cruising altitude. The seatbelt light blinked off with a faint chime, but tension still clung to the air like static. Passengers settled into wine glasses and tablets, trying to pretend the earlier dispute had vanished into the recycled air. At the front of the cabin, Margaret Lewis, the chief flight attendant, felt her device buzz in her pocket. She excused herself from pouring a drink, drew out the slim tablet, and scanned the urgent message. The words tightened her jaw. CEO present on board. Make formal announcement. Prepare for address. Her hand closed around the device. For one long second she did not move, only listened to the hum of the engines and the chatter of passengers who had no idea what was about to drop into their midst. Then she drew herself tall, smoothed her uniform, and pressed the intercom. Her voice carried firm and formal, the voice of protocol. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a special announcement. This flight is carrying a distinguished passenger, the chief executive officer of our airline. He would like to say a few words. The cabin fell into stunned silence. Forks froze midair. Heads jerked up. Business travelers leaned into the aisle, eyes scanning for someone important. The word CEO vibrated through the cabin like a tuning fork, its pitch sharp with prestige. And then he rose. From row 32C, near the lavatories, where humiliation had pushed him, David Cole stood. He didn't look like the executive's passengers expected. No tailored suit, no gleaming watch, no entourage, just a plain navy jacket, dark trousers, the quiet dignity of a man who had been forced to shrink so others could stay comfortable. Yet as he stepped into the aisle, his presence filled the cabin. Murmurs burst instantly. "This has to be a joke," one man muttered, his hand clutching his cufflinks as though they could shield him from the absurdity. "Impossible," another woman whispered, clutching her pearls. "That man, from row 32? Others scoffed, their voices laced with panic.
"He's lying. Must be."
But disbelief faltered as Margaret herself moved forward, guiding him gently with a respectful nod. David walked slowly, calmly, the same way he had walked down the aisle earlier. Only then it was an exile. Now it was a procession. All eyes followed him. Catherine Whitmore's complexion drained to chalk. Her jaw hung slack, eyes darting between Margaret and David as if reality had bent against her will. Her sunglasses slid down into her lap, useless shields now. She clutched at her handbag like a lifeline. David stopped midway in the cabin. He turned, standing tall against the rows of faces that had judged him. His voice rose, not loud, but clear, resonant, impossible to dismiss. "My name is David Cole. I am the chief executive officer of this airline. The boarding pass you questioned was mine. The seat in row 4 was mine, and for the past half hour, I have been sitting at the back of this aircraft, not because I was mistaken, but because I was judged." The words sliced through the cabin like a blade. Gasps echoed. Silence followed. David continued, his voice measured, every syllable deliberate. "I did not reveal my position sooner, because I knew how it would be received. If I had stood in that aisle and claimed to be CEO, you would have laughed. You would have accused me of fabrication, of trying to salvage pride with lies. So I waited until the announcement came from your own crew, so that you would know the truth without escape." He paused. The silence thickened. Passengers shifted uncomfortably in their leather seats. "And this, ladies and gentlemen," he said, his gaze sweeping the cabin, "is exactly the problem. On my own airline, with my own ticket, I was told I did not belong, not because of the seat number, not because of error, but because of prejudice, because too many of you decided what my place was before I even sat down." A heavy stillness fell. No one sipped wine now. No one reached for tablets. Catherine licked her lips, desperate. She tried to laugh, to find some angle of escape. I didn't know," she stammered. "There must have been some confusion, surely a mistake." David turned toward her, his expression steady, his tone sharp as steel, though soft as velvet. "No, you knew. This was never about the seat. It was about the way you looked at another human being and decided who they were allowed to be." The words landed with a finality that stripped excuses bare. Catherine's mouth opened again, but nothing came. From the back of the cabin, Margaret Lewis approached, her face set, her voice professional but unyielding. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said evenly, "you'll need to vacate this seat." Catherine recoiled. "What? No, that's absurd. Surely this isn't necessary?" But Margaret did not waver. "Please, ma'am, stand." The authority in her tone left no space for negotiation. Catherine clutched her handbag and rose slowly, her body rigid with shame. The same aisle she had once commanded with her venom now became a corridor of humiliation. Passengers leaned back, some staring openly, others ducking their heads to avoid the reflection of their own complicity. The whispers that had once mocked David now turned sharp against her. She said he didn't belong. And he's the CEO. My God, did you hear what she called him? Catherine's heels struck the floor with merciless rhythm as she moved toward the back. She kept her chin high, but her face burned scarlet. David watched her pass, but his face betrayed no triumph, no smirk, no gloating, only calm. When she was gone, he turned again to the cabin. "I do not stand here asking for respect because of my title," he said. "Titles fade, money shifts, status evaporates. What remains is how we treat each other when no one is watching, when no announcement is made, when we believe someone has no power to change our lives." He let the words sink in. "I was forced from my seat because of who I am. If it can happen to me, with all the privilege this position carries, then imagine how often it happens to those without the shield of a title. Imagine how many voices are silenced, how many dignities trampled, simply because of the lens through which others choose to see them." The cabin was motionless. Every passenger held in the gravity of his words. "I hope," David continued softly, "that the next time you see someone in this aisle, someone you think does not belong, you will pause, you will look again, you will see not the color of their skin, not the clothes they wear, but the person, because in that moment your choice determines more than a seat. It determines whether we live in contempt or in dignity." The silence that followed was heavier than the engine's roar. David inclined his head slightly, then stepped aside. His presence had filled the cabin, and now it lingered in the silence he left behind. No one laughed now, no one whispered. Only the echo of their own prejudice, reflected back at them with nowhere to hide. The confrontation in the cabin might have ended with Catherine Whitmore's walk of shame, but the story itself had only begun. 2 rows back, Daniel Perez, 31, Hispanic, a young tech analyst with quick hands and quicker instincts, had filmed the entire episode on his phone. From Catherine's slur to David Cole's calm revelation, every second glowed on the tiny screen in his lap. He didn't wait for the plane to land. With one tap, he sent the clip into the bloodstream of the internet. By the time the aircraft began its descent, the video was already viral. News sites scrambled to catch up. Social media burned with outrage. Headlines flared across timelines. Black CEO denied seat on his own airline. Passenger shames executive. Learns truth too late. The calm speech that silenced a plane. Commentators dissected every word David had spoken. Clips replayed endlessly. His steady walk down the aisle. His clear voice naming prejudice for what it was. His refusal to seek respect through power alone. The world could not look away. Catherine Whitmore, once accustomed to charity galas and glossy photographs, found her name trending for all the wrong reasons. Old associates cut ties, sponsorships vanished, photos of her luxury vacations were plastered beside the viral video, symbols of entitlement brought crashing down. Her friends stopped answering calls, her inbox filled with condemnation. Overnight, she became the face of arrogance exposed. For the other passengers, shame landed heavy. Richard Manning, who had laughed about fake tickets, now ducked interviews. Elaine Foster, whose pity had sounded like poison, avoided cameras outside her suburban home. Each of them had believed their whispers would vanish into the cabin air. Instead, the whole world had heard. Some issued apologies. Others stayed silent. But silence after David's words sounded like confession. And David himself? He did not rush to claim victory. He did not flood interviews. He returned to headquarters quietly, worked through the night, and agreed only to a single press conference the following day. When he stepped up to the podium, dressed in a dark suit, his face steady before the blaze of cameras, the world leaned in. "I want to be clear," he began, his voice measured. The same voice that had steadied the cabin. "I am not asking for respect because I am a CEO. Titles should not be the price of dignity. What I want, what I hope," he paused, his eyes sweeping the sea of reporters, "is that the next time a black man or any person stands up for their rightful place, the response is respect. Not because of status, not because of wealth, but because they are human beings, equal in worth, equal in dignity." Flashes exploded around him, but he did not flinch. "I had to wait for my crew to confirm who I was before I could speak without mockery. That delay itself is proof of how deep the prejudice runs. If even a CEO cannot claim his seat without humiliation, then what happens to those without titles, without power, every single day?" He leaned forward slightly, his voice sharpening, carrying into every living room tuned to the broadcast. "I don't want my experience to be an exception because of who I am. I want it to be a turning point, so that ordinary people, with no microphone, no headlines, no executive titles, can claim the same dignity without having to prove themselves first." The words carried far beyond the press room. The consequences spread like concentric rings. For Catherine Whitmore, it was ruin. Her name became a cautionary tale. Whatever she once held as untouchable dissolved in the acid bath of public judgment. She was left to reckon with the truth that arrogance, once unmasked, cannot be hidden again. For the passengers who had whispered and sneered, life went on, but with the sting of recognition. Some began to question themselves in quiet moments. How many times had they dismissed someone without thought? Others tried to forget, but forgetting was harder when the video lived on every screen. And for David Cole, the reversal was absolute. No longer the invisible man forced to the back, he became a symbol of dignity under fire. His calm refusal to let prejudice define him resonated far beyond the airline. Invitations flooded in, universities, conferences, organizations eager to hear him speak. But he measured his steps carefully. He knew the story wasn't about triumph alone, it was about truth. He continued to remind anyone who asked, the seat was never the point. The way we see each other, that is the point. And in the quiet of his office, long after the cameras dimmed, David kept the same notebook he had carried years before. its pages filled with reflections, reminders, fragments of speeches never delivered. On the first page he had once written a single line, now underlined twice. Dignity is not given by status. It is the ground we all stand on, whether others recognize it or not. Message. Sometimes the deepest lessons unfold not in courtrooms or parliaments, but in the narrow aisles of an airplane. A single seat became a mirror, reflecting back the assumptions, prejudices, and hierarchies people carry with them. One man was told he did not belong, not because of paperwork, but because of perception. And yet, by holding his ground with calm dignity, he revealed more than his own truth. He revealed the fragile illusions of those who judged him. His measured words, his refusal to trade insult for anger, carried farther than the cabin. They carried into headlines, into homes, into the conscience of a world too quick to decide who belongs and who doesn't. And that's the reminder worth holding on to. Dignity should never depend on titles or appearances. It should rest on something simpler, something universal, our shared humanity.